what is conditioning and why is it important for a person to think about it? For many people, this question may sound a bit boring and perhaps even irrelevant. Here I'm defining conditioning as all that a person has absorbed over the course of their life from family, religion, and our socio-cultural environment. Absorption means that we're not learning these things consciously, but are simply receiving these without having the ability to accept or reject them. Some of what we absorb include our opinions, viewpoints, beliefs, and much more. A person is rarely fully aware of the degree to which conditioning affects the way in which they respond to all of life. It includes what we like or dislike, what we are comfortable with, and most importantly, what we are fearful of. So why is this important? On a psychological level, it is important because conditioning can block our ability to succeed and achieve our aims in life. Then we are bewildered as to why things did not work out the way we had hoped or wanted. Further, it prevents us from being happy and creative as well. But if we desire to grow spiritually, the issue of discovering the limits of conditioning becomes critically important. Why is this so? It is this conditioning that is used to define who we think we are. This issue is difficult because when one is not aware of the existence of one's conditioning, it remains in the unconscious, hiding in the depths of our psyche. Also, the extent to which it forms the basis of how we respond to most aspects of our life remains unknown to us. In other words, we're so unaware of this reality that we do not even suspect that we're controlled by unconscious factors and therefore have no interest in looking at it. However, when one discovers the real situation they're in, one may want to pursue it much further and seriously begin to become more aware of how deep this goes. Thus, becoming aware that one is conditioned begins a process of making the unconscious conscious, so that one may find a way to go beyond this conditioning. Conditioning is often regarded by some spiritual teachers as being similar to mechanicalness. It has the quality of being unconsciously repetitive, whether it be in our behavior or in how we respond emotionally to events and circumstances. We respond in the same way over and over again and are not able to see this. There's a famous quote that many of you are familiar with. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. The fact that we're often acting from unconscious conditioning is what causes this to happen. And although it can be rightly called insane to do so, it is not so easy to observe one's conditioning, much less to respond differently from these embedded habit patterns. If we can begin to see that we're more conditioned than we've thought, a new process may begin. Certainly we will see that it is important to break free from any conditioning if we're not to repeat the same mistakes over and over again. But how might we do this? The main purpose of the video is to look at the nature of our conditioning from a metaphysical and spiritual perspective, which focuses on the need to discover what our essential nature is. In other words, to realize who we are in our essence and what we're capable of. To accomplish this, we must become aware of this perspective if we're to learn how to break free from our conditioning. To do that, we must thoroughly uncover the nature of that conditioning and understand how it functions. Without doing that, we'll not be able to learn how to move beyond it. Let's dig down a little more deeply. The fact that one is unaware of the significant influence our conditioning has on us results in our assuming that we're making conscious decisions of how we meet life's challenges and deal with our relationships with others. But too often, this is not the case. The reason we're unaware is that much of our conditioning occurs when we're quite young. The Jesuits and many religious orders knew this. In fact, one of the old Jesuit maxims says the following: "Give us a child until he or she is 7 years old, and I will show you the man or woman." They understood the power of the influence of conditioning. You could think of conditioning as your own personal operating system, or rule set, that is running silently in the background of your mind, without you knowing it's there. But before we can talk about the rule set of the mind as an operating system, we have to understand that since we have absorbed our conditioning, we do not know that we've been conditioned. We're completely unaware that we have an operating system that's unconsciously driving our behavior, and therefore we don't ask any questions about its nature. Why would we ask questions about something we don't perceive as existing? However, if a person begins to become aware that there's an operating system in control, only then will we become interested in learning more about it. Consider for a moment that we're a computer programmer. In order for us to change any program, first we must learn both the rules of coding and second, the code itself, so we can see the purpose and limits of that particular program. Until we fully understand the rules and limitations of the code, there's no better way that we'll be able to improve it, or better yet, create a new operating system. Therefore, it becomes crucial that we understand the nature of the operating system or rule set of the mind if we're to be able to transform it. As a person begins to discover the nature of their own code, that is, their beliefs and considerations, its limitations become more apparent. Thus, knowing the limitations of the code suggests that as long as the code does not fundamentally change, we're stuck with significant restrictions. It's like being stuck in a loop, mechanically repeating the same kind of life events over and over again. The shock of discovering that we're responding from unconscious programming can be quite jarring. The full recognition of our limitations often comes with strong feelings of dejection and disappointment. Yet all that's really happening is that we're recognizing how limited we are. This creates an internal friction. However, this is not necessarily a problem, and in fact, it's beneficial as this friction causes us to begin deeply inquiring into the problems and limitations of the present code. Inquiry can now be seen as an in-depth exploration of the present operating system, including one's belief systems and mental structures. When this is done sufficiently, one will see the necessity for a fundamental shift. Thus, we must become willing to see that an entirely new operating system is necessary. You might be asking yourself right now, how will it be possible to recognize that one is conditioned if one is completely conditioned? This is an important question. To see all this suggests that one must already have some code in them that is capable of seeing one's conditioning, of being dissatisfied with what is seen, and willing to seek something completely new. In some metaphysical traditions, this something was called baraka. One can think of it this way: to be willing to undergo a fundamental shift in consciousness requires a deep sense that one has the potential of becoming far more than what they are now. This must be alive enough in oneself that it can come deeply into one's consciousness, causing them to inquire to seek something that is alien to their normal operating system. So then, how do we get beyond this so-called rule set of the mind, now that we're aware that it has many limitations? Our primary tool is impartial observation, the same kind of skill any programmer uses. It is through the act of impartially observing our conditioned state that we can begin to see how our considerations create both unwanted and unneeded limitations. Impartial observing acts as a tool that helps us learn the nature of the operating system that controls us. We cannot see something as it is if we're judging it. This is the reason why the nature of one's observation must be impartial. Secondarily, when we do not judge or evaluate what we're observing, we gain distance from it, and then become less identified. Another way of saying this is that the more impartial we are, not only can we see the code as code, but also the beliefs contained within it. The more we do not identify with our conditioning, the more open we become to new ways of being. It opens the doors to an entirely new experience of living beyond our current belief structures. This process of discovery can then lead us into experiencing our deepest nature as spiritual beings, or as consciousness rather than as mere bodies that simply live and die in a material world.